LETTER the 28th of Life in Mexico. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Life in Mexico by Francis Calderón de la Barca. Letter the 28th. Día de Muertos. Leave Mexico. Heraderos. San Cristobal. Tunas. Plaza de Toros. Throwing the lasso. Accidents. Rustic breakfast. Country fair. Baked meat. Indian market. Buried bull. Mountain. Solitary hacienda. Reyes. Mules marked. Return. Queen of Spain's birthday. Diplomatic dinner. Santiago, November 3rd. Yesterday, the 2nd of November, a day which for 8 centuries has been set apart in the Catholic Church for commemorating the dead, the day emphatically known as the Día de Muertos, the churches throughout all the Republic of Mexico present a gloomy spectacle, darkened and hung with black cloth, while in the middle aisle is a coffin, covered also with black, and painted with skulls and other emblems of mortality. Every one attends church in mourning, and considering the common lot of humanity, there is perhaps not one heart over the whole Catholic world which is not wrung that day in calling up the memory of the departed. After early mass we set off for Santiago, where we intend to spend a week, to be present at the Heraderos, the marking of the bulls with a hot iron, with the initials of the proprietor's name, stamping them with the badge of slavery, which is said to be an extraordinary scene, to which all rancheros and Indians look forward with the greatest delight. We had a very pleasant journey here, leaving Mexico at 6 in the morning, and travelling at the usual rate with 7 horses and plenty of mozos. Indeed, no one attempts a journey of any length into the country without at least 6 horses or mules. Near Sopayuca, while they were changing horses, we went to mass, in the picturesque church of San Cristobal. The magnificence of these places of worship is extraordinary. Here was this country church crowded with léperos, the officiating priests, Indians with bare feet, yet the building large and rich, hung with black cloth, and lighted with great tapers, which threw their gloomy rays on as much of the rich gilding that encrusted the walls as the dark pall left visible. We got into the carriage a basket of that most refreshing of fruits, the tuna, which grow wild in abundance all over the country. The first time I unwarily pulled them off the trees, I got my fingers full of the innumerable little prickles which cover the skin, and which it is very difficult to get rid of. The Indians have great dexterity in gathering and peeling them. There is the green and the red tuna, the last the prettiest to look at, but not nearly so agreeable a fruit as the other. When we arrived at Santiago, we sat down to a dinner, to the number of about 50 persons, and in the room next to us was a party still larger, of lower degree, for all the world has come to be present at this annual festivity. 6th. The next morning we set off early to the Plaza de Toros. The day was fresh and exhilarating. All the country people from several leagues around were assembled, and the trees, up to their very topmost branches, presented a collection of bronze faces and black eyes belonging to the Indians, who had taken their places there as comfortably as spectators in a 1-shilling gallery. A platform opposite ours was filled with the wives and daughters of agents and small farmers, little rancheras with short white gowns and rebosos. There was a very tolerable band of music perched upon a natural orchestra. Bernardo and his men were walking and riding about and preparing for action. Nothing could be more picturesque than the whole scene. Several hundred bulls were driven in from the plains, bellowing loudly, so that the air was filled with their fierce music. The universal love which the Mexicans have for these sports amounts to a passion. All their money is reserved to buy new dresses for this occasion, silver rolls or gold linings for their hats, or new deerskin pantaloons and embroidered jackets with silver buttons. The accidents that happen are innumerable, but nothing damps their ardor. It beats fox hunting. The most striking part of the scene is the extraordinary facility which these men show in throwing the lasso. The bulls being all driven into an enclosure, one after another, and sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, were chosen from amongst them and driven into the plaza, where they were received with shouts of applause, if they appeared fierce and likely to afford good sport, or of irony if they turned to fly, which happened more than once. 3 or 4 bulls were driven in. They stand for a moment proudly reconnoitring their opponents. The horsemen gallop up, armed only with the lasso, and with loud insulting cries of "Ah, toro!" challenge them to the contest. The bulls paw the ground, then plunge furiously at the horses, frequently wounding them at their first onset. Round they go in fierce gallop, bulls and horsemen, amidst the cries and shouts of the spectators. The horseman throws the lasso. The bull shakes his head free of the cord, tosses his horns proudly, and gallops on. But his fate is inevitable. Down comes the whirling rope and encircles his thick neck. He is thrown down struggling furiously, and repeatedly dashes his head against the ground in rage and despair. Then his legs being also tied, the man with the hissing red-hot iron in the form of a letter brands him on the side with the token of his dependence on the lord of the soil. Some of the bulls stand this martyrdom with Spartan heroism, and do not utter a cry, but others, when the iron enters their flesh, burst out into long bellowing roars, that seem to echo through the whole country. They are then loosened, get upon their legs again, and like so many branded canes, are driven out into the country, to make way for others. Such roaring, such shouting, such an odour of singed hair and biftek au naturel, such playing of music, and such wanton risks as were run by the men! I saw a toreador, who was always foremost in everything, attempting to drag a bull by the horns, when the animal tossed his head, and with the jerk of one horn tore all the flesh off his finger to the very bone. The man coolly tore a piece off a handkerchief, shook the blood off his finger with a slight grimace, bound it up in a moment, and dashed away upon a new venture. One Mexican, extraordinarily handsome, with eyes like an eagle, and very thin and pale, is, they say, so covered from head to foot with wounds received in different bullfights, that he cannot live long; yet this man was the most enthusiastic of them all. His master tried to dissuade him from joining in the sport this year, but he broke forth into such pathetic entreaties, conjuring him by the life of the Señorita, etc., that he could not withhold his consent. After an enormous number of bulls had been caught and labelled, we went to breakfast. We found a tent prepared for us, formed of boughs of trees intertwined with garlands of white moss, like that with which covers the cypresses of Chapultepec, and beautifully ornamented with red blossoms and scarlet berries. We sat down upon heaps of white moss, softer than any cushion. The Indians had cooked meat under the stones for us, which I found horrible, smelling and tasting of smoke. But we had also boiled fowls and quantities of burning chile, hot tortillas, atole or atoli, as the Indians call it, a species of cake made of very fine maize and water, and sweetened with sugar or honey; embarrado, a favourite composition of meat and chile, very like mud, as the name imports, which I have not yet made up my mind to endure; quantities of fresh tunas, granaditas, bananas, aguacates, and other fruits, besides pulque at discretion. The other people were assembled in circles under the trees, cooking fowls and boiling eggs in a gipsy fashion, in caldrons at little fires made with dry branches, and the band, in its intervals of tortilla and pulque, favoured us with occasional airs. After breakfast we walked out amongst the Indians, who had formed a sort of temporary market, and were selling pulque, chia, roasted chestnuts, yards of baked meat, and every kind of fruit. We then returned to see a great bullfight, which was followed by more herraderos; in short, spent the whole day amongst the toros, and returned to dinner at 6 o'clock, some in coaches, some on horseback. In the evening all the people danced in a large hall, but at 11 o'clock I could look on no longer, for one of these days in the hot sun is very fatiguing. Nevertheless, at 2 in the morning, these men, who had gone through such violent exercise, were still dancing jarabes. 8th. For several days we lived amongst bulls and Indians, the herraderos continuing with variation of collier, riding the bulls, etc. Not the slightest slackening in the eagerness of the men. Even a little boy of 10 years old mounted a young bull one day, and with great difficulty and at a great risk succeeded in forcing him to gallop round the circle. His father looked on, evidently frightened to death for the boy, yet too proud of his youthful prowess to attempt to stop him. At night, when I shut my eyes, I see before me visions of bulls' heads. Even when asleep I hear them roaring, or seem to listen to the shouts of "Ah, toro!" The last day of the Herraderos, by way of winding up, a bull was killed in honour of C